Hi Ashton, we're on page 109, Module 4, Lesson 2 for math today. We are learning how to multiply multi-digit decimals, and that is today's lesson. So page 109 in your math book is where we left off, and that's where we're going to continue right now. So by the end of the lesson today, our goal is so that you can understand how to multiply multi-digit decimals up to thousandths. And we're going to do a little bit of shading, so if you have some colored pencils, that would be ideal. If not, just a regular pencil will work fine. So let's go ahead and get started. It says one way to multiply decimals is by using a decimal grid. Okay, the grid represents one whole where each unit is 0.01 or 1/100th. Okay, so if you had a problem where we were multiplying decimals, you have 5/10 times 4/10. Okay, so I'm just going to grab my regular pencil here. It says to represent 5/10, I can shade blank columns, which is blank squares. So if I am shading 5/10, if this whole thing represents one whole, each row is worth 1/10. So if I'm representing 5/10, that means I would have to shade in 5 columns, and 5 columns would be, I guess columns go this way, 5 columns. That would be the same as 50 squares. Okay? Now to represent 4/10, I can shade in 4 rows, which is 40 squares. Okay? Now, it says shade the grid to represent 5/10 and 4/10. How many squares have been shaded twice? All right, so I'm choosing to use 2 different colored pencils so we can sort of make a point here. Hopefully it shows up all right. So first thing I'm going to do is shade in 5/10. Okay, so I said I'm going to shade 5 columns, which is 50 squares. So if I shade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns like this, okay, hopefully you're doing this together with me. 5 columns like so, I've shaded in 50 squares. Now I'm going to shade in the 4/10, which is 4 rows, which is 40 squares. Now it says, how many squares have been shaded twice? Well, if I shade 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can sort of see here it's shading in blue. And as I get to the edge here, oh no, did I do the right amount? 1, 2, 3, 4. Darn it. I went 1 too many, Ashton. Luckily, this colored pencil erases pretty good. So 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And you notice when I come over to the already colored yellow side, instead of it shading blue, it shades in green. I did that on purpose so that you could sort of see what we've got here. Okay, so the blue represents the part that was unshaded. The yellow down here represents the part that we had originally shaded. But this green section here is where both squares have been shaded. All the squares have been shaded twice. Okay, so how many squares have been shaded twice? Well, we've got a 4 by 5 green square here. So that tells me that I've got 20 squares, right? You see all right with that pencil? Okay, so 20 squares have been shaded twice. And the double shaded squares represent the decimal now. Well, if it's 20 squares shaded, that's 20 out of 100, which would be 20 hundredths, which would be 0.20. Okay? So 5/10 times 4/10 is 20 hundredths, or it could be written 0.2 2/10. Okay? They don't have a box for me there, but just to show you, but these two numbers are equivalent. These are equal. 2/10, 20 hundredths. All right? Another way to multiply decimals is to use an area model. Okay? So that's going to be a little bit further down your page there. It says Kara buys 11 2/10 pounds of pork chops for $3.50 per pound. How can you find the total cost of the pork chops? Okay, I feel like I do this kind of math all the time in the grocery store. Not something that's easily done in your head, so we definitely want to map it out. So the first question says, how can you find the total cost of the pork chops? Well, we need to multiply 11.2 pounds times $3.50. Okay? An area model shows partial products using place values. Complete the area model by multiplying to find the partial products. So here we've got the 1, a 1, the decimal point, and a 2 to represent our 11 and 2/10. And on the side here we have 3 decimal point 5. So that represents this amount, the $3.50. Since there's a 0 in the hundredths place, we don't need to include that as part of our area model. It would just be zeros. So we can think about what we have here. So we did 3 times 1, which is really 3 times 10, because that was an 11 there. So we're expanding this. So this is like having 10 plus 1 to give us that 11, and then plus 0.2 over here. All right. So we've got 3 times the 10 is 30, 3 times the 1 is 3. Now we have to multiply 3 times 0.2. So 3 times 2/10 is just simply 6/10. Okay, just 3 times 2 is 6 with the decimal point. Okay, in the bottom row here we have the 5/10 now, so 0.5. So we're multiplying 5/10 times 10. Okay, so now it's getting a little bit trickier. 5/10 times 10. I believe that Mrs. Briere showed you how to multiply times the decimals here. So especially when you're multiplying times tens, you can just move the decimal point over. So if I'm multiplying 5/10 times 10, I can just move that decimal here, and I get 5. Okay. Now this next one here is multiplying 5/10 times 1 whole. So 5/10 times 1 is 5/10. Now the last one, we've got 5/10 times 2/10, which you can sort of see from the way we did it up in this grid here. 5/10 times 2/10 is just 5 times 2, which is 10. And since there's 1 decimal place here and 1 decimal place there, that means my answer needs to have 2 decimal places. So 5/10 times 2/10 is 10/100ths, or 1/10. Okay? So we kind of answered the question to B here by completing this area model chart here. So what is the sum of the partial products? Well, we have 30 plus 3 plus 6/10 plus 5 plus 5/10 plus 1/10, or 10/100ths. Okay. Now, obviously, adding these up, you might be tempted to do this in your head mentally. I would really suggest finding a spot to line those numbers up correctly here. I'm kind of limited to room, but I'm just going to use the space that I have up here. I've got 30. Okay. My next biggest whole number is 5. Add that. Next biggest whole number is 3. Now I've got these 3 decimals, so the thing I need to make sure of is that my decimal points are lined up. So I have 0.6, 0.5, and 0.10. Okay, and I've run completely out of room up there to add up. So let's see, I'm going to just kind of shift my answer over to the side here. 0. 6 plus 5 is 11, plus 1 more is 12, so that's going to give me a 2. Then my decimal point, and then I'm going to carry the 1 over here. So 1 plus 5 is 6, plus 3 more is 9. And then my 3 is by itself, so I get $39.20. Okay. All right. Sorry about cramming that work in there. Hopefully you made room or used an extra sheet of paper or something to follow along with me as I did that. Okay. All right, Ashton, let's turn ahead to page 110. just going to grab an extra sheet of paper so I don't have to do that again. There we go. Okay, on page 110 it says, Jared mows the grass every weekend in the summer. The amount of gas he uses per hour is shown. How much gas does he use in 5 8/10 hours? All right, so we have to use the graphic here, and it points over here to the 1.2 liters of gasoline each hour. So if he's using 1 2/10 liters of gas times 5 8/10, we would set that up like 5 8/10 times 1 2/10. All right. And actually, I'm just going to write that on this line because I don't need to do any solving yet. So they're just asking for the expression. All right. And we're trying to find out the amount of gas so that our equation might have equals G, something like that. All right. B says find an estimate of this product by rounding each factor to the nearest whole number and then multiplying. So 5 8/10 is almost, we'd have to round to the nearest whole number, which is the nearest 1 basically. So 5 8/10 would round to 6. And if I was multiplying 1 2/10, that would round down to 1. So I have 6 times 1. So we're approximately going to be using about 6 liters, approximately, of gas. That's what my estimate tells me. Okay. Now, this is what I was just getting started to do before I stop myself here. It says another way to multiply decimals is to multiply as you would with the whole numbers, then count the number of decimal places after the decimal point in the factor. So I sort of did that in the second one. What is the product of 58 times 12, and how many decimal places are in the factors 5.8 and 1.2? Well, I see 1 decimal place there and 1 decimal place there. So if I was just going to multiply 58 times 12, I might use the area model or partial products or some other method. Okay, I've been doing whole number multiplication with my class in 4th grade of 2-digit by 2-digit with the area model, so I think I'll use that. Okay, if you remember, I'm going to expand 58, so I have 50 and 8. I'll expand 12, so I have 10 and 2. So now in this box I have 50 times 10, or 500. In this box I have 50 times 2, which is 100. Here I have 8 times 10, which is 80. And here I have 8 times 2, which is 16. Okay. Once I've got my partial products, I'm going to add up my partial products here. Okay, I have 696. Now, the strategy that they just mentioned was count the decimal places, and then however many decimal places are in your problem, that's how many should be in your answer. So I've got 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, so I want to put my decimal point between this 6 and that 9. So I have 6 96 hundredths. Okay? All right. So just to be sure that I'm answering the question correctly here, it says, what is the product of 58 times 12? Well, we got 696. And there are 2 decimal places. Okay? The product must have the same number of decimal places as the total number of decimal places in the factors. How many decimal places should there be in the product of 5.8 times 1.2? We said there should be 2. Now, what is the product? That's the answer that we just came up with. We said it is 696 with the decimal point going right there. Now, we sort of talked about this, so you don't need to write this part down, but explain how you knew where to place the decimal point. Well, we counted. In our factors, there's 1 decimal point place, 2 decimal places, so our answer needs to have 1, 2 decimal places. Okay? Now, what was our estimate? Do you remember? My estimate was 6 is close to the product of 6 96 hundredths, so my answer is reasonable. Okay? It's actually closer to 7, but 6 is pretty close. If you would have come up with something like 700, that would have been your clue to say, oh, I'm way off, right? Okay. So those are 3 strategies that we just kind of came up with, that we just went over for multiplying decimals. You might find it easier to just multiply regularly and then add your decimal point in at the end. That's the most common way that most people do it. However, don't forget that we showed you the grid method. If you have a grid, this is really good for understanding why that works. And then you'll also have the option of using the area model if you're comfortable with using that. Okay? Me personally, Ashton, I stick with this method where I just multiply like regular and then add my decimal point in at the end. Okay? This is really my go-to method for multiplying decimals. All right? Let's do one more together, and then I'm going to have you try some on your own. Last summer, Rachel worked 38.5 hours per week at the grocery store. She earned $9.70 per hour. How much did she earn in a week? Complete the area model to help find the answer. Okay? So if this were the area model, they've already done the work for you in terms of setting up your area model, but you can make these area models on your own. So let's just fill it in. 9 times 30 is 270. 9 times 8 is 72. And 9 times 5/10, that's, well, 9 times 5 is 45, right? And since there's one decimal place there, I would just put it in the middle, 4 and 5/10, like so. Okay. Down here, it's sort of the same thing. I've got 7 times 30, which is 210, with one decimal point place, which goes there. So really, it's like having 21 there. 7/10 times 8, so well, I just know 7 times 8 is 56, with one decimal place in my factors, so I have one decimal point in my answer. Okay. Next, I have 7/10 and 5/10. Well, 7 times 5 is 35. And I've got 2 decimal places in my factors. That's 2. So I'm going to put 0.35 there. All right. I like this row. This is going to be nice and easy for me. 0 times 30, 0. 0 times 8, 0. 0 times 5/10 is 0. Okay. So how much did she earn in a week? Well, now I have to add up these partial products here. So go over to my extra sheet of paper and line everything up correctly. That is so important. If it's not lined up correctly, you will not get the right answer. I used 270 first. That was 270 was my largest whole number. Then I had 72, 21. Okay, use those 3. Next, I'm going to add 5 and 6/10. It may look like mine are not lined up now, but you know that I'm lining up according to my decimal point. I did 5.6, 4.5, then do 0.35. Okay. Now, if it helps you, you can add zeros in here, and that may be a little bit easier way of lining up your numbers. If I add up my columns, I get 11 plus 3 is 14. 1 plus 2 is 3. 1 more is 4. 9, 13. 7 and 7 is 14 plus 3 more is 17. And then 3 with my decimal point in there. So I get $373 and 45 hundredths dollars. That's how much she would make at the grocery store. So don't forget to include your dollar sign in your answer. And there you have it. Okay? All right, let's try one more together, Ashton, then I'm going to have you turn out on your own. It's just very straightforward, not a word problem. Find the product of 2 3/10 times 0.6. So if I had 2 3/10, and I was going to multiply times 0.6, I would do times 0.6, like that. Okay, that looks like a regular multiplication problem. I'm going to ignore those decimal points for a moment, and I'm just going to solve the problem like it was 23 times 6. Okay? So if I'm doing this, I would get 6 times 3 is 18, 6 times 2 is 12, plus 1 more, that's 13. Now, decimal place there, decimal place there. That means I have to have 2 decimal point places in my answer, which means it needs to go between the 1 and the 3. So 2 decimal places are hundredths. So that would be 1 and 3800. Okay. All right, Ashton. Pages 111 and 112 are the on your own. Okay. Now that was kind of a lot to take in for one day, so I'm going to make this assignment due on Wednesday. So I want you to work on the on your own section 111 and 112, and then log into Google Meet at 2:30, and we can discuss any questions that you had about that. And then I'll assign the more practice and homework for Tuesday, and I'll make everything due by Wednesday. And don't forget, I need to see some evidence of your work completion. So either submitting me your answers via Google Doc, or a picture is ideal. I need to see your evidence of your work completion. Okay, Ashton? So page 111 right now. And I'm going to pause my video. You pause your video, and then we'll come back and you can see how you did. All right? Okay, Ashton, on page 111, you can take a look at my answers, pause the video to compare and see what I wrote for each one and see how that matches up with what you did. I did not include any of the work steps that I did, so if there's something specific you have about steps that you did, then we can talk about that during our Google Meet. Okay? So here is answers for numbers 3 through, you can see down to about 7. Pause the video if needed, and there you go for the rest, 8 and 9 towards the bottom of the page. Okay, again, pause it if you need to take a closer look. Okay, on page 112, there you go again. And I just wanted to point one of the things out when you have a number like this. Okay? When you have one where it has 2 decimal places and you have only a number that equals like 35, we added these zeros in here to make sure the decimal place had enough, our answer had enough decimal places in it. The placement of those zeros has to be in front. So we want the zeros and the tenths and the hundredths places, because if you add them at the back of your number, that doesn't help us to expand the numbers into the correct number of decimal places. All right? Okay, Ashton. So hopefully you were able to follow along and complete that portion of the lesson. Your assignment that you have to complete for me is page 113 now, and more practice in the homework section by multiplying multi-digit decimals. Okay? Please make sure that you log into Google Meet if you have any questions, and we will discuss further. Okay? This is not due until Wednesday, so take your time, do a good job, and make sure that you submit your answers to Google Classroom so that I can see your evidence. All right, Ashton, have a good day.